Hello, Stoned Apes, and others who are curious about the healing powers of psychedelic medicines. Welcome to the Stoned Ape Reports. I'm your host, Stuart Preston. Each episode, I talk to another Stoned Ape, somebody who has experienced the transformational powers of psychedelics, or with a practitioner who works with these medicines. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with David and his experience in treating his addiction to opiates with Ibogaine and other plant medicines. Ibogaine is a naturally occurring psychoactive plant medicine with dissociative properties and is often used to treat opioid addiction. His story is large, but his audio was a little rough. But please bear with it, it's worth it. One thing to know, David's path is not one like a typical 12-step program. His use of these plant medicines was purposeful, with intention, not recreational, and helped him get to the core of his trauma. He also works at a plant medicine recovery program called Inscape, helping others along their paths. Okay, let's get to it. Please enjoy this episode with David. All right, David. Well, thank you so much for joining me here on the Stoned Ape Reports. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to come here and share your story and hopefully help some other people that may find themselves at a similar place in life.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be part of this, and thanks for the invitation to share my story.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of your story, why don't we just kind of jump right in there? We like to cover kind of what you were dealing with in life before you discovered plant medicines, and we'll talk a little bit about the plant medicines, but why don't we start with what was going on in your life that needed a change? What was, your challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it was kind of a twofold thing. So, the first, we'll say, layer of issue was, I had struggled for, I would say, about 20 years with drug dependency, opiates, benzos, alcohol. Pretty much anything that allowed me to escape from my circumstances. I used at one point or another. Basically, when it came into my field of awareness that plant medicines could potentially help with addiction, I'd been on several prescription narcotic medications, one of them being suboxone or buprenorphine for, 'cause I was addicted to opiates, and switched over to that, thinking that would be the crutch to help me through. Basically, what I found over time is that that medication worked fine for making it where I wasn't using other opiates, but as a polysubstance drug abuser, I was still using other drugs, and basically my life was just kind of becoming extremely unmanageable. Now, I'm going to back up just a bit in my story. So, I had actually had a fairly significant period of sobriety prior to, making the decision to go on narcotic medications. I had a frame of reference for what a better lifestyle and a better, more importantly, mental health can look like from that period of sobriety. And, basically the twofold thing was the drugs I was using were just causing a lot of, problems, not catastrophic. I had experienced those in my previous period of using before I got clean, but, this time around it was much more just emotional and mental health problems where, I just had this, I guess, certain way of looking at the world, and just a lot of behaviors that were certainly not adult behaviors that really started to drive me crazy and kind of fed into this cyclical cycle of just being, really, really not well.
Yeah.
So basically, I'm not even really sure how I got the idea in my head to look at plant medicines as a solution to kind of get out of the inevitable end of where my addiction was taking me, which was most likely going to be suicide. I had problems with that in the past, and that always seemed to be where my addiction took me. And that was, honestly, the only thing that had me stop for periods of time was, serious attempts on my own life. In any case, I don't know if, honestly, I think it just kind of popped in my head, this word Ibogaine, and, being kind of a very studied drug user, I obviously knew a lot about different intoxicants and things like that. And I'd heard about Ibogaine, many, many years ago, number one, due to its extremely long duration entheogenic experience and how crazy all that is, and what a experience it is. But I also read in conjunction that it was very effective as a means for opiate detoxification. And again, it wasn't like it just kind of came back into my head. This was in the summer of 2016. Look into Ibogaine. So I watched a video. I think it was actually a Joe Rogan podcast where this guy wasn't a drug addict. He was just kind of explaining his experience, and I was like, all right, well, that sounds interesting. I think I watched a provider, an Ibogaine provider's kind of testimonial video where they talked a little bit about what's known about the science behind Ibogaine and how it may be effective for opiate detox. And basically it was just kind of sold like, all right, this sounds like a possible solution to get off of this suboxone that I had been on, which is, it's a very difficult opiate. Once you're placed on it and are on it for a period of time, it's a very difficult one to displace from your life. A lot of people are able to, cut their dose down significantly, but it's just really hangs around in the body for a long time. It causes a very, very prolonged physical and dysphoric withdrawal, and it's difficult to get off of. And it's, for some reason, kind of having that informational refresh with Ibogaine, it kind of gave me some inspiration to, I really don't like the way this stuff is making me feel. Like I'm super depressed. I have no joy in my life. My behavior is just not becoming. So that's kind of what set things in motion. And, shortly after kind of doing, and I very much kept my research into it very limited, as not to give myself too much bias one way or another, or too many expectations. But, shortly after, I did reach out to an Ibogaine provider. Their facility is called Awakening in the Dream House, and this is facilitated by Asha and Rocky Carabelli. And I don't think they mind me using their full names. They're pretty well out there in the Ibogaine community.
Okay.
I basically had a conversation and, expressed kind of what my challenges were and my desires. And we made a plan. It was a plan that was going to require quite a bit of work on my end to make it happen. But we basically came up with a plan for a date for me to go to Mexico, which I had never been to Mexico, and stay with these folks who I knew through phone conversations, and take this wild entheogenic drug, quote unquote. So basically, to get from that point of that conversation to when I actually got to Mexico, it required me tapering. So I was taking 16 milligrams a day of suboxone, which, that's a fairly pedestrian dose nowadays. And I was able to, taper off of, basically cut my dose in half almost immediately. And it took me, so this initial call with them was, August or so of 2016. And I arrived in Mexico in January of 2017. So, it took a few months to taper off the suboxone. And in fact, I went I think it was about a month where I had gotten to a low enough dose of suboxone where I was able to switch to, and this was on recommendation from the provider, I was able to switch to a short-acting opiate. And I don't really know how I managed to do that and not just go off the rails and start, buying heroin or, going crazy, but somehow I was able to, get a very modest amount of hydrocodone and oxycodone tablets and, really use only what I needed to for that period to keep me from being sick.
Yeah.
Also before I went to Mexico, I kind of in the withdrawal period, I did actually have, a fairly serious attempt on my own life, intoxicated and just really in a bad spot, despite having kind of that light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, fortunately that didn't go as planned in that mind state. And I also, my father passed away right before I went to Mexico. So there was a lot of hurdles that I had to clear, but I made it. And that's really kind of where my plant medicine story starts. As far as, psychedelic experiences, I had a limited amount of recreational experiences with low-dose psilocybin, took LSD a few times at a couple Fish concerts. One entheogenic experience, and I'm not saying that psilocybin doesn't fall into that category, I just didn't use it in that capacity.
Right, yeah.
But the one entheogenic experience, unexpected, that I had was actually with salvia divinorum, which really kind of blew me away. It was one of those things where a friend of mine, I've got this salvia stuff. It's some super concentrated extract. And of course, we didn't know that, this salvia divinorum is reverse tolerance. And usually when you're smoking those extracts, you're overdosing yourself to the nth degree. But in any case, I got blasted. And, it was a really strange thing because this occurred in a period where I was very, down and dependent on a lot of drugs and just not doing a lot of good things in my life. And the thing I remember, aside from the experience with salvia, which was just, mind-blowing because I had and scary too. I had never had that level of reality shift up in my life, is that for several days afterwards, I just had no interest in using drugs. I actually basically stayed clean. I took a little bit of the I think I was taking clonazepam, and benzos was another thing in my history. But all the other stuff, drinking, everything, it was kind of I just feel like I don't need this stuff right now. And that effect lasted for a couple days. So, that was kind of my first, I guess, experience of, I did this thing in a recreational setting, but I had this other completely unexpected effect from it.
Did you go into that salvia with the purpose of making a change, or did you go into that as more of a recreational thing?
So I did not go into it with any expectations. I did not know that. I didn't really know very much about salvia. It was kind of if you're interested in trying something a little crazy, I've got this stuff. Let's try it. And, again, at that point, my idea was I'm going to take anything that's available to me to kind of get out of my circumstances. But obviously, in that moment, that plant had a different plan for me because it was far from any experience that I had with recreational psychedelic use, and it really kind of left me in a very interesting spot, and not a bad spot. It was an experience that was so intense for me that literally I just felt like I don't want to do anything else to my body for a few days until I kind of collect myself. And the content of that journey was, extremely unexpected, essentially encountering versions of myself, as like a young child, and then, instantly a slightly older version of and having these conversations, which I don't recall the details of these conversations that I had with these different versions of myself, other than that I knew that I was kind of getting information downloaded to me that might be very important.
Interesting.
Yeah. And, basically, like I said, my psychedelic experience was fairly limited up to, arriving in Mexico and, undertaking this Ibogaine experience.
Yeah. And you said discovering the Ibogaine was kind of an accident. You did some research into it, but you don't really know how you came to discover that as a specific way to attack this.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I had done like a Google search on natural ways to withdraw or to discontinue opiates, but it was something that just kind of just appeared into my sphere of awareness, and once it was there, I kind of latched onto it, like, yeah, this sounds like maybe something that could help me. Yeah.
All right. And so what was, I don't know if you're ready to jump into it now, but what was the experience like? I mean, we don't want to necessarily do a detailed trip report, but, I think Ibogaine is one of those things that a lot of people don't really know about. So, I mean, after all you've been through, all the different substances and your experience with salvia, and then going into this, is it ceremonial? Is it more therapeutic? I mean, how did the whole thing go?
Sure.
Going into it and going through it.
So the way that, opiate detoxification or flood doses are done with Ibogaine kind of varies wildly. I mean, you can go to, literally Bwiti facilitated ceremonies, although generally for opiate detoxification, that's not sufficient because they don't really use Ibogaine in that setting. They generally more use Iboga root bark, which is not really suitable. It's not strong enough for opiate detoxification. There's not enough Ibogaine in the root bark. But in general, the continuum of these types of providers is, people who are kind of doing a, we'll say a loose ceremonial context, but also incorporating the medical safety aspects. So, I mean, that's something that maybe I'll just take a quick tangent on and talk about that. So Ibogaine is definitely, in my experience, effective for eliminating opiate detox symptoms and a number of other things. The downside of it is it is a very toxic, or it can be a very toxic compound. Specifically, people who have cardiovascular issues and certain liver issues are really not suitable candidates. And because of the QT interval prolongation that Ibogaine provides, it requires pretty diligent medical monitoring, especially at the dose range used for opiate detoxification.
And what is that? You just said the QT. What is that?
Yeah, so I mean that's basically a heart function. I mean I'm not a cardiovascular specialist, but essentially certain drugs like methadone and there are certain drugs that actually prolong this QT interval as to Ibogaine. So there's drug interactions that can cause potentially fatal heart arrhythmias. There's obviously existing conditions that need to be ruled out. So the point I'm getting at, without getting too bogged down in all the medical details, is that generally with an opiate detox, it's hard to provide a ceremonial setting because it really, if it's done correctly and safely, it's more on the end of a medical procedure than a ceremonial ceremony.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are literally clinics where you take Ibogaine and you're literally basically in a hospital room hooked up to an EEG or EKG machine, and with emergency resuscitation equipment nearby. So,
Wow.
My situation was a lot less of that, where obviously they had emergency medical equipment, but I mean, I basically my Ibogaine treatment was done in a private home, with ceremonial aspects incorporated. So, there are some providers that work that way. That a lot more of them work more in a more medical context. So the ceremony aspect is generally not as present.
Yeah, just kind of there to create the right setting, maybe it's the right mindset, but not so much the spiritual ceremonial piece.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, as far as my experience, I had a very, we'll say mystical experience, a full experience. A lot of people, when they utilize Ibogaine for opiate detoxification, they don't really have much of a entheogenic experience, because the Ibogaine or the medicine really is working primarily to detoxify, reset the brain, the body, and it just doesn't get to a level where there's much of a entheogenic experience going on. So I would say that, for most people who are doing this for opiate detox, it's generally not like this mind-blowing entheogenic experience. And in a lot of cases, it's actually very, very difficult, because, you're under the influence of Ibogaine, and you're also concurrently going through a very fast, rapid opiate detox.
Yeah.
So mine was on the end of the spectrum of, and I think part of it was because I had stopped using, basically all drugs except for the small amount of opiates that I needed to, basically not throw up on myself for the month before I went to Mexico. I really made a concerted effort to go into that process as clean as I could be. And I think the reward for that is that I got to see a lot more of the Ibogaine experience than the average person that kind of, well, I'm going to go do this treatment, so I'm going to go full out, and I'll deal with, getting clean when I get to wherever I'm going for Ibogaine.
Yeah.
As far as kind of the basics, I mean, I don't really share a lot there, just because it was a highly personal experience. But what I will say is the first thing that so obviously when I started, or when I was given the medicine, I was very much in opiate withdrawal. So I mean, basically having, pretty strong opiate withdrawals. I felt terrible, and and obviously freezing cold, but then also sweating, and all the stuff that comes along with opiate detox. So I would say about an hour or so after I had taken kind of the test dose. So they don't give you this whopping amount of Ibogaine all at once. Everybody, or at least responsible practitioners, will kind of start with a test dose to make sure there's no weird interactions or you're not allergic to it. But in any case, even so, with the test dose, like basically about an hour after that, I already felt, I felt like I was not in opiate withdrawal anymore. Like my body kind of heated back up to a stable temperature regulating ability. And I think I was, and again, the timing is hard to say, because this went on for, I think the entire experience was about 3 days. And Ibogaine is such that for most people, it causes significant ataxia. So the vast majority of people that take an Ibogaine flood dose are just in bed for 3 days. You can't really move. My experience was for a significant part of it, I actually could ambulate myself without issue. But yeah, once the real heavy duty, waking dream state started, I was pretty much stationary. And I mean, in general, it was a lot of just kind of what I was seeing was just a lot of all of the different ways that I had poisoned myself. It was weird because I kind of was involved in the visionary state, but I was also detached from it. So it was like there wasn't any emotion. I wasn't scared. I wasn't sad. I was just kind of an observer of my consciousness and unconsciousness. It was really an interesting. Yeah, it was just a very interesting thing. I mean, there were several, we'll say, key visions that came that really helped kind of open the door to the path that I chose to take after the treatment. I had some amount of vomiting at some point, but I mean, realistically, it was a very, gentle opiate detox.
Wow.
And, I basically the end of it was the recognition and realization that I can't go right back home after this is over. And that was my plan. So I basically, had planned to stay there for a week, which was the recommendation of the providers, because obviously the detox is 3 days long, and then you want a couple days to kind of, recover a little bit, and then back home and back to work, and all of that went out the window once I really came out of the journey and realized, like, man, if I go home now, this is all going to be a waste. And that was one of the main impactful things was just, and I think for me, being always a person, people pleaser, and I don't want people to be mad. I think that just taking that step of saying, you know what, I don't care, what other people think. I don't care what my wife thinks. I need to do this, and I'm going to do this. And what this was is stay or find an aftercare program or another treatment program where I had more time to kind of get myself together.
Yeah, that sounds pretty wise.
Yeah. So that's kind of what happened. I talked with Asha and Rocky about, this idea that, if I go home right now, it's just not going to work. My wife was still taking a lot of the medications that I had, spent the last couple months, and then just went through this Ibogaine thing to get off of. And, for people in recovery, when a significant other is using, generally that doesn't work out very well. And there was just a lot of, stuff stirred up from my Ibogaine experience that just needed attention. And there was no way that coming back to my life in the United States after that experience was going to allow that process to unfold.
Yeah. So what did you do?
So I ended up going to, and again, this was, thinking about it now, it's kind of crazy that I did this because it was so fly by the seat of the pants. And generally I'm not a fly by the seat of the pants kind of person. I look into things, I research things, but for some reason I didn't do a lot of research with Ibogaine, and I didn't do a lot of research into what the next step could be. Fortunately, Asha connected me with a guy named Dinesh Alesko, who at the time ran a program called Living Clean Ibogaine out of an eco retreat center in Melanelco, Mexico, which is a small puebla, about 2.5 hours southwest of Mexico City. And I kind of took it at face value of sounds good. It looks, it's held in a natural environment. It sounds like they can support some more integration time and basically, just provide a container for my therapeutic process to unfold. I also, found out that they work as part of the therapeutic process with other entheogenic plants, and having had a very positive experience with Ibogaine, I was certainly open to exploring that kind of space further. So it basically was within 2 days. My plan to come back to the U.S. was, no, I'm staying in Mexico for another 6 weeks and going to a secondary treatment program.
Wow.
Yep.
That's amazing. So you went through the 6 weeks. Anything you want to touch on there? Is it really just a matter of making sure you integrate?
Sure. I think the big thing was I'm so glad that I did that, because Ibogaine is really, really kind of rough on the body, and it took me the better part of, I think it was about a week and a half to be anywhere close to normal functioning. Now, I'm going to caveat that with, again, yes, I had done Ibogaine, but I had also detoxed off of a fairly substantial opiate habit. So I know there was some combination, but as an example, one of the things that generally happens with people when they take Ibogaine or Iboga, especially in large doses, is you don't sleep for several days, usually after that. So you start kind of compounding sleep deprivation with residual drug withdrawal, and your body's still kind of looking for that, and it gets to be a very hard space to navigate for a little while. And I feel like that's probably why a lot of people who don't have some follow-up care, don't always make it with Ibogaine, because that period of time right after Ibogaine is definitely rough, especially when you're used to kind of comforting yourself anytime you're not feeling good with benzos or opiates or alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the idea after Ibogaine is to not use any of that stuff. Initially the program gave me a very, safe space with a community of other people who were basically in the same exact situation as I was, to unpack my Ibogaine experience. The middle part of my treatment program was really where the heavy lifting with ayahuasca came in, and we can kind of come back to what that looked like and how that was beneficial. But I mean, it was very a very deep work for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think for the whole group that was there at the time, they were very, very deep ceremonies, and and then really the last third of the stay was kind of putting all the pieces together, working with the doctor, Dr. Carlos Alviar Lopez, to help release some of the body traumas and fine tune some of my neurochemistry through some phytosupplements that he designed, and basically get a plan together for a prolonged recovery plan once I returned home.
Nice.
Yep.
Outstanding. And so then when you came back, this was 3 years ago or so. What has life been like, since that? So have you continued to do any kind of plant medicine regimens, or have you made any other kind of trip down to Mexico, or, what is life like for you right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I first came back, it was actually really difficult, because like a lot of things that I was just kind of doing automatically or unconsciously, it was almost like I forgot how to do them. So like things like driving around my town, like it was like, I've lived here forever, and like I don't feel comfortable driving, and like I wasn't really sure like what my role was within my business, because I had been gone for a while, and I honestly felt different about things, and things that had bothered me that I was able to kind of stuff down when I was using. Like now, I didn't have that kind of that ability to just to push it down. So it was like I had to deal with all these things. My home life was still a wreck because my wife was still using and really kind of getting in a bad way herself. So but somehow I was able to manage all of that and kind of gradually find my footing and not let what was going on externally have any effect on kind of what I had now internally. So I mean, that lasted a couple months. She actually went a few months, basically maybe 4 months after I came home and got off of all the stuff she was doing herself. She also did an Ibogaine flood dose.
Wow.
And basically, things just kind of gradually started to move away from a codependent relationship where both people are using drugs to so both of us were clean and sober when we first met and for the first 5 years of our marriage. So again, we had kind of a framework to work off of, where it's not like we didn't know each other without the drugs and alcohol. We just allowed that to kind of hold our relationship hostage for several years. But things continued to improve. As far as continuing to work with plant medicines, definitely kind of took the approach of, I'm going to try to drink plant medicines like once every month, at least for the first year of my recovery. And I pretty much did that, including 2 trips back to Mexico for a week, kind of intensive immersion retreat, and then some peyote ceremonies out in Colorado. I mean, basically what I found after that first year is, I feel like all of that intensive plant medicine work, really helps set the stage for where I'm at now and where I want to go. And it kind of served as like we'll say a lighthouse or a beacon to keep me going forward on the path that I had started in Mexico. On the flip side of that, it also, especially once I was, 20 ceremonies deep into this, it really started to resonate that, like, dude, you got the message, man. Like, are you going to keep sitting on the phone, or are you going to hang this phone up and go do something with it? So that was kind of like, I had like this initial like, oh man, like I want to explore these spaces as much as I can. Of course, like any person who's addicted to things, you find this new thing that kind of gives you this different sensation or whatever, and you want to repeat that. But interestingly enough, and in total contrast to all of my other drug using experiences, what I found is the more plant medicine I did, the less I wanted to do more. And that's that's like the ultimate paradox. And I mean, I know why, but if somebody, starts drinking alcohol and, finds out that it's adaptively advantageous for them, like, oh, I feel better, I can talk to women, whatever. Well, you keep doing that. And generally there's not like unless there's a huge problem, for a lot of people, there's not like a stopping point. It's just like, I keep doing this. It's working for me. And what the plants started to show me is like, dude, you need to like space this out over a much longer period of time and allow yourself longer periods of time to integrate the material that's coming up. And I mean, that's kind of where I'm at now, where, if I do a plant medicine ceremony once or twice a year, I feel like that gives me ample opportunity to integrate that and work with my psychotherapist to really dive into that content without overloading it. And I just feel like I'm being more genuine to what I actually need versus what I think I need by kind of now deciding, you don't need to do an ayahuasca ceremony every month unless you're becoming you're apprenticing through a lineage to become an ayahuasquero. The Westerner doesn't need to drink ayahuasca once a month. And,
right.
So, I mean, as far as kind of the trajectory, I went from being, kind of on the verge of ending my own life, despite having full awareness of how selfish it was, blah, 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 having issues within my business, just issues in every area of my life. Like anybody who has a drug addiction, that's basically what it comes down to, is it affects every area of your life.
Yeah.
Where today, I mean, I feel free. Like I'm not, I'm not low-hanging fruit, so to speak, where, let's say the pharmacies all of a sudden shut down and you can't get your prescription pills. Well, 3 years ago, if that situation happened, I would have been screwed. Like, I can't take care of my family. I can't do anything because I'm sick, because I'm dependent on all this crap. Where today, I don't have to take a pill to get out of bed. I don't have to take a pill to go to sleep. I don't have to take a pill because I have too much anxiety. I can just kind of navigate those experiences and with the comfort of, hey, this is a temporary situation, and I have the tools to be okay with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
As far as material things, I mean, financially, I mean, not that I'm like super wealthy or anything close to that, but I don't worry about money. I have no fear of economic insecurity. I'm not scared to just be myself, and I'm not scared of people. I'm not hiding in my house like I used to. I'm out and about. All of the not all of them, but many of the relationships that were damaged are in that period of using. I've made strides on my end to repair. I mean, first and foremost, by not being the same asshole that I was before all of this, but also by, genuinely, forgiving that person, forgiving myself, and, expressing an interest in trying to make things right. I mean, the more time goes by and the more that all of this plant medicine work and connection to other recovery outlets, and being involved in Inscape Recovery, which is the aftercare program that we basically continued after the program I went through discontinued in Mexico, and things are just going much differently than they were 3 years ago.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it. I mean, that's quite a way to put that in a small way. I mean, it sounds like things have gone 180 degrees for you in a really incredible way. As you repair these relationships, make new relationships, and grow your life, how have you been talking to other people? I mean, when you get so deep into this and you go through this Ibogaine detox and you work with plant medicines, I mean, it becomes such an important part of your life. Do you find yourself talking to, quote, normal people or other people out there about this? And does it raise their eyebrows? Have you had to deal with any stigma? I mean, are there people, and I don't know the answer to this, but are there people out there who are battling addictions who believe that there's a certain way to go about that and this way is not the right way?
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as my approach to other people, so again, at first it was I want to sing the praises of this stuff from the mountaintop. Like, everybody, why suboxone? Why are people not being, told about Ibogaine? And, over time, what I've realized is that, when it's your turn to find these things, they will find you. So I've kind of taken a totally different tact on that, where it's like, you know what? I'm just going to let my results speak for themselves without speaking for the plant. If somebody directly asks me, I'll tell them, kind of how I've gotten to where I'm at today. But, I feel like there's so much information out there now, and a lot of good information about these things. I mean, it's like, I don't think I can go much more than a week now without there being some mainstream publication, talking about the benefits of MDMA or psilocybin or ayahuasca or whatever. So, I feel like there's a ton of content out there, and I don't need to really spread that message directly. I feel like by just being genuine and being a good person and, trying to live in a state of working towards self-actualization, like that attracts interest in of itself without having to kind of do all the plant medicine talk and, I took this and I took that and now I'm this. It's like, that it's not even really my belief on how these things work. So if somebody asks, of course, I'll share my story. And if somebody who's addicted is looking for something different than I've already done, 10 different rehabs. I've been on methadone. I've been on suboxone. I've tried everything. I keep failing. The 12-step groups work for a while and then it doesn't. That's somebody, if I feel like their consciousness is open to something as radical as Ibogaine, I might make that suggestion. But I've kind of decided that for the most part, the people that know, and the people that don't, I'd rather them kind of be attracted to, wow, I knew this guy before, and I'm not sure what happened to this guy, but this is not the same dude that I knew 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago. So as far as a stigma around these treatments, definitely. I think in the U.S. it depends on the part of the country that you're from. So being, in the Midwest, I think the information is not as definitely within like the AO or the alcohol and drug treatment community. It's definitely kind of behind, and I think there's a lot of resistance just in general to psychedelic therapy because, as somebody who treats addiction, there's actually a DSM-5 diagnostic code for hallucinogen use and abuse disorder. So I think most folks that are working in that capacity look at it like, well, this is ridiculous. You're treating drug abuse with another drug. How's that going to work? But that can kind of be thrown right backwards. Like, well, hello, suboxone, methadone, etc. And what I'm seeing that is really bothersome across the drug addiction treatment world is just this whole idea of medical management where, all right, we're going to get you off of heroin and methamphetamine and get you to stop drinking, but we're going to give you gabapentin and some kind of SSRI and some kind of antipsychotic. And it's like, what are you guys doing to these people? So I think that despite there being a lot of information and good quality information and good quality studies and, an entire, Johns Hopkins, of course, everybody knows about them because of the coronavirus tracker, but a lot of people probably don't know that they have a psychedelic research institute right there at Johns Hopkins. So, I think the information is definitely out there. It's a matter of kind of where people's social media feeds and attention is tuned, whether they're seeing that or they're just kind of, yeah, man, well, if you take LSD or mushrooms, you might have a bad trip and you might do this or that. And they don't really know that, actually before these things kind of got unleashed in the way that they were on the general public in the 60s, there was a lot of research going on into, using these agents for treating, at that time, untreatable mental health illnesses.
Yeah.
Including addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that as the, humankind as a whole is increasing its level of consciousness, I think these things will find their ways into more people's minds and hearts. I think right now we're at a interesting crossroads of, people looking for something different because antidepressants, maybe work slightly better than placebo, and they have their whole own set of problems. And, people have just been suffering with these unretractable conditions for a long time that are getting, maybe some relief, but the side effects of the drugs they're taking probably offset any relief they're getting, where I think people are ripe for something different.
Yeah.
But it's, it's like anything. It's an information war. And, of course, for any good information you can find about the efficacy for Ibogaine, significantly reducing opiate withdrawal and post-acute withdrawal symptoms, you'll find a story about how, this one person died from Ibogaine, and, of course, they don't tell you that the person actually died from a drug overdose because they took an opiate while they still had Ibogaine in their body. So Ibogaine reduces your opiate tolerance to like nothing. So if you use heroin right after Ibogaine, you're basically using like a naive opiate user.
It's a dangerous time.
And of course, there are people who have, not disclosed, a major health concern and had problems like that. But most of the Ibogaine fatalities that I'm aware of, have either been an undisclosed, unknown health situation, or somebody who used opiates right after taking Ibogaine.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's good for people to do research, and along those lines, I'm really grateful that you come on and tell this story and share the benefits and make sure everybody's aware of everything. And your story is just phenomenally inspirational. Before we wrap up here, is there anything else you want to get out there and want to talk about or share?
I kind of briefly mentioned Inscape Recovery, and just to kind of plug that as, so I think, kind of dovetailing back to my story, for me, the Ibogaine really kind of opened a door for me and said, here's the way that you've been living, the way that you've been thinking, your collective belief system, and here is a different door. You can take either door. I'm not going to force you to do anything, and the choice is yours. And I think what, really solidified that for me was going to an aftercare program and having that extra time and, those extra deep, conscious expanding experiences with ayahuasca and not just ayahuasca. I learned how to meditate in that treatment program. I learned different breath work techniques, all of which is part of my recovery plan and program today. A lot of the things that I learned while I was there, I utilize today as kind of, fundamental foundational practice. In any case, I can't say enough about, people who are embarking on the path of Ibogaine, especially for substance abuse arrest or mental health issues. I know of a person who successfully treated an eating disorder with Ibogaine. I can't say enough about taking that next step, and whether it's a program like Inscape Recovery, which is a residential aftercare with a full schedule of activities, and if you want more information about that, you can visit our website at www.inscaperecovery.com. There are other aftercare programs that are specifically tailored to post-Ibogaine care. But for a lot of people, that may not be financially in the cards, but you got to do something. Get linked up with an integration coach. A friend of mine, Jonathan Dickinson with Steba Ibogaine, does a really good job of helping people that maybe don't have the resources to go to a full-on aftercare program, but is basically being a weekly or more than that if needed contact to help process that experience and help put the person in connection with the right resources. That's kind of what I'll end on is, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to be part of the program, because, the way I see it is, that space, that therapeutic container, and all of the pieces that went into that was there for me to make the transformation that I've made. And, that's what I hope for anybody that goes down this path, is that it's not just I tried that, it didn't work, but it really kind of, clicks into a life transformational experience.
Right. Well, I'm so grateful not only for you to come here and share all that, but that you're continuing to work at Inscape. I'll definitely put a link to that, on the podcast so people can go find that and look into it. And just David, thank you so much. Congratulations for all the work you've done. It's really, truly amazing. And thank you for sharing your story here with us. And I'm just grateful for your time.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks again for having me, and my pleasure. And, I think the thing that I've really learned is that, we can only keep what we have by sharing it. It's kind of a means to get back, is you put the information and you put your story out there, and hopefully somebody listening to this podcast is like, I maybe I'll look into this, because I really want out of this situation, and I know in my heart that I can do better than kind of the life that I'm building around me right now.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope somebody's listening that's what they do. And thank you, David, for pointing them in the right direction.
Absolutely.
That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy, and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening, and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.